Hi everyone, I'm Education Week commentary editor Elizabeth Rich, and I'm here with Peter DeWitt, popular blogger for Finding Common Ground. You're also a published author on several books about school leadership and school climate, and you're also a former K-5 school principal. So that is a pretty busy job, right? You've got to deal with faculty, you've got to deal with students, you've got the district office. What are some of the other issues that have come up for you when you were a principal?
I found during the time when I was a principal, it wasn't just your school community, but it was also sort of the outside noise that was coming in, whether you're talking about accountability, mandates coming from the state level, the federal level, those all affect how a building principal operates as well.
So when you were a principal, how did you find time to do any sort of professional learning? Or did you?
I hope I did some. I would always go to like my go-to people that when I was in ed leadership courses, Michael Folan. So I would, if he had a new book come out, I would read that. I would do a lot of work online through some of my leadership journals that I came across that I would look for different articles in there, and sometimes I would just do a Google search about what is it that was on my mind that I was worried about, like helping teachers with student engagement, and I'd plug that in to start looking for it that way.
So that's interesting. I'm wondering how, now that you're out there and you're talking to other school leaders, what's your sense of how they're finding resources? I mean, is it in the same way that you did? Are people using different, how many years has it been? 5 maybe for you?
It's been about almost 4.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So what's your sense of how people are finding resources?
I think there's a variety of things. I think social media has been really huge for that. People get on Twitter, they have people that they follow. It's kind of flattened that part where you've got all those people that you used to read and they're all on Twitter, so they're tweeting stuff out. Sometimes it's what I give them. I have Google Docs that go along with every workshop that I run, and it has absolutely every resource that I talk about within the 1, 2, 3 days, however many days I'm going to spend with them. And I give them that link at the head of the workshop, so they have access to all of those documents as well. So sometimes it's what I'm giving them, and if they find a particular area very interesting for them, then they can go and look in the Google Doc for just that article or those research articles around there.
So I'm a school principal, and I've been begging my district leader to have Peter DeWitt come to my district. They're not going to do it. Where do I go to find some of the stuff that you're telling other district or other school leaders to read?
I mean, obviously for me, the big one, and not just because I write for it, but Education Week is huge. That's where I get a lot of my information, because there's just a variety of ideas out there. I'll go to Leadership 360 blog and those kind of things too, to sort of see what their line, Ann and Jill's line of thinking is. Other times it's educational leadership and ASCD. Those are typically my 2 go-tos.
And do you have a sense of, should somebody trust their gut about what they're reading? Like what's a good barometer to know, this could be helpful? Yeah,
that's a great question. There are a couple of things that I look for. Number one, it's the credibility of the writers. So if I'm looking at Ann and Jill's Leadership 360.
And Ann and Jill would be?
Ann Myers and Jill Berkowitz from the Leadership 360 blog for Education Week. I know them, so they've got credibility with me. When I'm looking at different articles, I'll look for the research that they're using. How current is the research? How deep is the research? What are the practical examples that they're offering? I look for a balance between the research aspect of it, but also the practical sense. And the credibility piece, to go back to that, is something that's really huge for me. Have they been in the role before? How long were they in a role? Those kind of things are important.
Yeah, that makes sense. So let's get to this issue. We promoted this saying that you were going to be talking about mindset.
Yeah.
What's good leadership mindset? What does that involve? What does that look like? Is there one particular thing above all others that should be priority?
Yeah, I guess it's a little self-serving when I say this, but what I always ask when I'm going to run a workshop on collaborative leadership is, do you have a collaborative mindset? Because I find that there are leaders that want their teachers to collaborate, or they want a stakeholder group to collaborate, but they don't necessarily think that they're the ones who are supposed to be collaborating too.
Interesting.
So that piece, I think, is really important. I get a lot of information. I wrote a blog about why the growth mindset won't work. And some of that was based on John Hattie's research, who I work with. And it was that we always tell kids to have a growth mindset, but we're treating them in very fixed ways. The same thing can be done with collaboration. A lot of the research that I looked at for both the collaborative leadership book that I wrote and the school climate book that I wrote talks about the idea that collaboration really doesn't have any necessary benefits more than if you just did it by yourself. Because what happens is we don't challenge each other's thinking. And within that idea that we have to challenge each other's thinking comes this whole idea of self-efficacy, which has been around since the late 70s.
And what does that word actually mean, or that term?
Self-efficacy was really first found by this human theorist named Albert Bandura back in the 1970s, and it was something from the RAND Corporation that they put out. And it's really the strength and belief that we have, that we can make changes ourselves, but also help other people make changes. So that's basically what it comes down to. So therefore, people with a high level of self-efficacy, they will look at a challenge and say, what are the different ways I need to go about meeting this challenge, and what are the different tools I have in my tool belt? Somebody with a low level of self-efficacy would look at that and just say, I can't possibly do that. Actually, Bandura and others have research that shows that teachers with a low level of self-efficacy don't feel that they can make an impact on student learning. So these are teachers that are within a classroom with students, and they don't think that they can make an impact on student learning. So that's pretty huge. I think leadership and leaders really need to look at this whole idea of self-efficacy, because I believe that a lot of the challenges, a lot of ways that we get over obstacles come back to that.
So how do we get there, right? To me it sounds like the difference from the layman's terms between being defensive and being open. So how do you get to that place as a school leader? Obviously, if you can get to that place as a school leader, you can help your teachers.
Yeah.
But how do you get there as a school leader? Like, what are some steps?
Yeah, I think the unfortunate piece is that every conversation you've had up to right now has mattered around the self-efficacy that people have. So what you want to make sure that you're doing is, are you having those collaborative settings within like a faculty meeting where you're flipping your faculty meeting and sharing best practices, the structures that are in place for teachers when they're working in PLCs or those kind of things, how much teacher voice has been incorporated into that, have teachers felt like they have a say in the decision making, because those are some important elements to kind of create this or foster this school climate that focuses on increasing self-efficacy and then what's called building collective teacher efficacy. So
when we were talking about this a little bit earlier, this issue of accountability came in, and so I'm wondering if, briefly, because we're running out of time, and I just want to remind everybody, I'm here talking to Peter DeWitt. He's the Education Week blogger for Finding Common Ground. You also do leadership work with school principals. You also talk a lot about school climate. So I'm just remembering what I'm trying to say here. We were talking about accountability and how this culture of accountability, and accountability, I do want to say, it's not a bad word,
no,
right? But it has contributed to more what? Like, how would you describe the culture and trying to get back out of that?
I think it's led to more compliant engagement rather than authentic engagement. It's about getting things done correctly, like, am I doing this right, kind of stuff, as opposed to risk taking. I'll talk about the idea that in a proper school climate, you should have a balance between risk taking and rule following, or authentic engagement and compliant engagement. I think in many ways, some of the accountability and mandates that have happened, and they've kind of been on steroids, have led schools to always feeling like we have to make sure that we're doing this right and we want to be compliant. That doesn't really foster a school climate that's going to focus on collaboration, because it's never going to be authentic. It's always going to be compliant that we're working on. Do
you feel that we're moving away from that, or do you feel like there's still a bit of a hangover from that?
There's still a major hangover.
Yeah.
I don't even think a little bit of a hangover. I think that it has created a culture within schools that we're trying to chip away at and get away from. I said this to you off camera. Michael Folan said the greatest statement to me ever, and I'll always remember it. Just because you're stuck with their policies doesn't mean you need to be stuck with their mindset. And I think that that's kind of helped me lead into what are the areas we control, like faculty meetings or teacher observations, that we can make it more collaborative, so we feel like we have more of a voice, because we can't always control the noise coming at us, but we do have certain parts of our day that we do control, and we need to make those more collaborative. So
I want to put you a little bit on the spot here for my last question. You are now leading a workshop, and you're talking to yourself 4 years ago as a school principal. What would be advice that you wish you had gotten, lessons learned?
Wow, I would be...
You were perfect. So
I would just be so amazed to have me as a workshop facilitator. Now, I really don't think it's something that I said. I really think it goes back to the Michael Folan thing, because it was 4 years ago that he said that to me. And I think it comes down to stop worrying about what you don't control and start looking at those areas that you do control, that you can increase teacher voice. Because quite honestly, if you're always focusing on compliance, you're chipping away at the self-efficacy of the teachers, and that's going to chip away at the self-efficacy of the students. So look at those areas that you do control and try to make them more collaborative.
Okay, I actually am going to ask you one more question. So my final question actually is, what about for teachers? I mean, is there any quick word of advice you can give for teachers who are struggling with this, especially if they're in an environment maybe where they don't have the most supportive school leadership? Like, what can they do on their own to foster that?
Well,
self-efficacy.
I think that's a good question, because I don't think it's any different than some of the experiences I had as a teacher. And I didn't control, I worked for a particular school principal that it was all about compliance. And I feel like when I was in the classroom with the kids, that's what we would focus on fostering within that environment. And I would say don't give up on that, because always, and make sure that when you're looking at the policies and those kind of things you're dealing with, are they real, or are they just things that you have in your head? Are they things that your principal actually said, or do you have a little bit more flexibility than you think you do?
Okay, well, I want to thank you for joining us today. This is Peter DeWitt, Education Week blogger for Finding Common Ground, author, leader of many discussions around school leadership and culture. I'm Elizabeth Rich, commentary editor for Education Week. Thanks for joining us.